The supplement industry before DSHEA was a different industry.
There were some major players, but it was a much smaller industry, not as developed as it is today.
Much smaller selection of products, much less diverse than it is now.
It was younger. Many of the companies were founder owned and operated. Many of those people had come out of a health crisis and they were looking for answers and solutions. It was a combination of the West Coast hippies, of the Intermountain West Mormons, the East Coast Long Island and New Jersey, which were the vitamin people, and then the West Coast were the herb people. And it was colorful, it was interesting, big personalities, which you had to have if you were essentially trailblazing a new industry. Or I look at it more as the resurrection of a very old industry that nearly died in the United States. When we look back, it's remarkable to me the amount of cultural change that has come through this industry, just the way people talk, the lexicon, the language that people use today. A lot of that was created by us. So I have fond memories of the pre-DSHEA period, with one dark cloud is the constant and ominous presence of FDA. And that was a big problem for a lot of companies that were being chased around. The agency had policies that made no sense.
It was by and large FDA's just outright hostility toward the notion that supplements and had any value to provide to consumers. And this goes back to even in the early 1970s, when FDA was trying to limit dosage on supplements. And I use the word supplements generically here because supplements were in a legal category, a lawfully recognized category of food until DSHEA.
You know, the FDA was out there with the list of 27 herbs, which were, very common herbs. But back then they were considered dangerous, toxic herbs. FDA was publishing their FDA consumer magazine with, skull and crossbones on it over a cup of steaming herb tea.
The industry was under siege. Let's be clear. The FDA had published its DSHEA report and had an agenda to take supplements off the market or heavily restrict their potencies and keep botanicals, everything off the market. Remember, the FDA's mentality is they are uncomfortable with dietary supplements in general because they're somewhere in between drugs and foods. It has always been a source of regulatory discomfort for them because the FDA loves to regulate everything like drugs.
And then right before DSHEA, Steve Shapiro and my dad was lead counsel, took on FDA on behalf of Traco Labs and Oakmont in defense of the concept that evening primrose oil and black currant oil sold in capsules were not food additives.
In September of 1988, the FDA brought two cases. One was United States versus two plastic drums, which involved Traco Labs and blackcurrant oil, and another case against Oakmont Investment, United States versus 29 cartons. And that was also, there were various oils involved, but we really focused on blackcurrant oil. And at that time, we knew about dietary supplements, but they were not a separate legal category. They were simply food. And FDA was taking the position that any food that has more than one ingredient could be regulated as a food additive and not as a food. And the critical part of that is, if a product or a substance is a food, then it is presumed safe, and the FDA has the burden of proving that it's unsafe to take it off the market. If a substance is deemed a food additive, then the burden shifts, and the company selling the product has the burden of proving that the ingredient is generally recognized as safe. So the FDA brought these litigations, and these litigations if the FDA had won, all right, basically every ingredient in a dietary supplement would be subject to a safety standard that would be totally unreasonable, a safety standard designed for, chemicals added to food and not for food itself. And what happened in Traco and in Oakmont was, in both cases, the courts found the FDA's position to be totally unreasonable. Alice in Wonderland, all right? The issue is blackcurrant oil in those cases was a food, and simply placing blackcurrant oil into a gelatin capsule did not change it from being a food to a food additive. Taking a botanical ingredient and mixing it in water did not change it into a food additive. And this was critical at that time because the cost involved and the testing involved to prove that every botanical ingredient, every dietary supplement ingredient met the extended food additive safety standard would have been unreasonable. Or most of these products would have been no longer been able to have been sold. By winning these cases, it became clear that FDA was just not set up to regulate dietary supplements the way they should be regulated. These were cases that were brought against two relatively small companies. Certainly, Traco at the time was a startup company. And we're talking about what the industry was at that time, and maybe how it's different than now, maybe not. But what I think people should be aware of is that defending these cases, bringing these cases that were so critical to leading up to DSHEA, obviously there were litigation costs and they were expensive. Robert Ullman, my boss at the time, partner at Bass and Ullman, basically went to other companies, other players in the field. And I wish I knew them all, but I know that at the time, Natural Organics, Jerry Kessler, Solgar, Alan Skolnick, Hal Drexler, Countrywide, all of these companies contributed. They assisted these companies. They put up money to help with the defense to make sure that the blackcurrant oil cases were defended. And that's basically, the kind of industry that it was, where these, fierce competitors, they understood how important these cases were, and they all contributed, and we all worked together to make sure that we were able to litigate these cases and get these important victories against FDA.
I became president about the time it became very clear that we were going to need to have real legislation passed in order to protect our industry. Our industry was going to disappear, folks. There were safety issues, there were quality issues. FDA was down our tails. And I know Loren helped us a great deal at that time and began to lead a charge to say, here's what you do. Because he had worked in Washington, he was an aide, I want to say, to Senator Hatch. Yeah, he had some background in the ways of politics.
My role began, actually, you have to go back to 1978 when I was working for Senator Hatch in Washington, D.C. It was his first term in the Senate. That was a fortunate opportunity for me to get to know him and to work with him. I have a high regard for him as a person, and high regard for him as a legislator and as a political leader. I took a really strange left turn out of law school and joined Nature's Way in 1981 as their general counsel. I was there for 10 years here in Utah, got to know a lot of the other companies locally, of which there were many. And again, this is the dark part of our pre-DSHEA period, where FDA was really going after so many herb companies in particular. After 10 years at Nature's Way, I resigned my position, and it was for the purpose of thinking through and trying to come up with a way to address this. That led to a whole bunch of meetings with FDA, meetings with members of industry, to talk this thing through. There was a growing sense, we have to do something. What is the something? And after exhausting all options, concluded it's going to have to be legislation. That's the only way to really fix this. Well, that's no small undertaking. I called 8 of my company friends here, USANA, New Skin, Nature's Way, Nature Sunshine, Weeder, others as well, Solar Ray. And we started a series of meetings. We met for about 6 months. This would have been in mid 91 to end of 91. We worked up a series of bullet points of what we thought legislation would have to look like. What do we have to fix? We needed a definition. We needed to get rid of this food additive thing. But we also wanted to send a clear message that FDA should keep their mitts off natural products generally, unless there was a serious safety concern that they should address, of course. So we worked up a one-pager. I called the Hatch office, asked if I could have an appointment, flew to DC, sat down with the senator and told him what our problem was. And he had always said, if you need my help, just call me. And I said, Senator, we need your help, so I'm calling you. I gave him this one pager and was just briefing him up on what we felt we needed, legislation to define and protect the dietary supplement industry. And I was about 60 seconds into this, and he said, I'm good. And I'm in. Go get yourself a Democrat in the House. That was the beginning, really, of the concept of a legislative push. And he made it really clear is, this is what you have to do. I'll do my part. The question is, can you in the industry do your part? Which means go get yourself a Democrat in the House, go rally a whole lot of consumers. You're going to have to make a whole lot of contacts to members of Congress to back me up. Well, that's exactly what ended up happening.
At the time, I was the legislative director for the Nutritional Health Alliance, and it was one of the main lobbying groups. There was also the Utah Natural Products Alliance.
Citizens for Health, Sandy Gooch and her incredible work at Mrs. Gooch's to rally support.
What we did was we connected everybody to Washington, D.C., the health food stores, and the health food stores connected the customers. And the industry, the manufacturers were supporting that infrastructure so that communication could be done. And we were quite successful.
We did quite a few things. Every month we would have a different gazette or newsletter out to our 4.5 million customers that would come into our markets. And one of the gazettes was about this challenge. And the first paragraph says, on May 6, 1992, just before 9 a.m., agents of the Food and Drug Administration, in concert with local police, raided the Tahoma Clinic in Kent, Washington. The officers, wearing bulletproof vests, kicked in the door and entered with guns drawn. For the next several hours, the frightened employees and patients were ordered not to make phone calls, while the agents confiscated, among other items, computer equipment, patient files, food allergy testing equipment, and nutritional supplements. So that was the opening paragraph to let our customers know, whoa, there's a problem. And our customers were riled up. They were concerned. They told other people. And not only with this gazette, but we also had town hall meetings. Citizens for Health were some of the people who came in and explained to people. We had meetings in Beverly Hills, Van Nuys, Glendale, you name it. And the auditoriums were packed with people. And then we gave them information. What are you going to do when you leave this meeting? You have to contact Congress. You have to call the president, contact everybody that you know.
Blackout Tuesdays. There were thousands of mom and pop retailers that would put up black crepe paper over their supplement sections on Tuesdays. And people would come in to buy it. They would say, what's the deal with this crepe? You can't buy supplements today. Why not? Go sign this petition. Why? Because if you don't, you're not going to have supplements to buy. Really? Tell me more. They would put phones on the checkout counter with the phone number of their two senators and their one congressman. And there was a little script, pick up the phone, and you would call, and you would always get somebody on the phone. And basically read in the script and say, I want you to leave supplements alone. I want you to support this bill, 784.
Part of the education even occurred with our own staff, our own team. We made sure that we had meetings with them, whether they were in the meat department, the produce department, cashiers, that they knew about this important issue, the DSHEA issue. And so one-on-one, they could talk to customers, even those that weren't in the supplement aisle, about, we have this challenge and we need your help. So all employees, we had 830 employees, were on board and communicating. Then our customers would go back, talk to their neighbor, their friend, their aunt in Chicago, their uncle in Florida, and tell them about the challenges that they would be facing if DSHEA were not passed.
That was probably the signature of DSHEA, is it was a true populist uprising of consumers. And this comes from Senator Tom Harkin, who had been in Congress a long time. And he said, Congress has not seen a constituent, I call it a constituent contact level, not just letter writing. It was face-to-face meetings, it was faxes, it was calls, it was every possible kind of contact, town hall meetings, that DSHEA generated more constituent contacts to Congress than anything since the Vietnam War. And I think it may be true since as well.
I do remember vividly that in 1992 and 1993, the top issue in letters going to Congress, and just before the internet takes off, mind you, was vitamins. And you would hear members of Congress at the time saying, I don't want to hear any more about vitamins. I got lots of letters.
There were huge rallies at Expo West, Expo East. They were incredible. We would bring celebrities in, Hollywood celebrities, and they would just foam the crowd up. And there were regional groups that were popping up. There were petitions, postcards, faxes, letters. The only thing we didn't do was sign messages with airplanes, but pretty much everything but that. And that went on for the better part of 2 years, unrelentingly. And what people have long forgotten is that there were a lot of members of Congress that had no plans to sign on to DSHEA. After being bombarded by this level of constituent contact, they got really annoying. They didn't like it, but they got on the bill. And that's what mattered to us.
You know, it was a testament to, may rest in peace, Jerry Kessler, the founder of Nature's Plus, who was my boss at the time and was also the head of the Nutritional Health Alliance. You know, he told David Kessler to his face, because I was there, that we were going to get legislation passed. And David Kessler, who was the commissioner of the FDA, was like, go ahead. You're really going to get a bill. Jerry Kessler was like, matter of fact, watch, we're going to get a bill done. And we did.
Yeah. Woo. Getting over the finish line, number one, it was just tenacity. Senator Hatch was incredible. He would never give up. And when we were ready to throw the towel in and just thought, we can't get this thing done this year, he wouldn't let us go home from DC. So we were there day in, day out, and trying to find a way to negotiate this thing. And it was down to a small group of legislative negotiators on the House side, on the Senate side. So we knew each other really well at that point, and we knew exactly what their positions were, where they would move a little, where they wouldn't move at all. And we just kept hitting a point of, we can't get anywhere from here. The key factor is tenacity, number one. Number two was extraordinary political leadership, which we had. Senator Hatch, Senator Harkin, Bill Richardson, unbelievable. And we had a number of members of the House as well that were tremendous supporters. We needed extremely committed industry leaders, and we had them. We had heads of companies, owners of companies that were writing checks they could barely cash to keep supporting the cause. They were deeply, deeply invested in this personally. It was a personal matter for them. Do we have that same level of commitment and passion for the cause today? I've asked myself that. Our ownership structure is really different. That would make DSHEA difficult to do again. If you don't have that strong political leadership, unfortunately, we're kind of a low tide right now. Whether we have the strength of industry leadership, we needed Hollywood. They were the X factor that we didn't know was going to come riding in at the last minute and make a really big difference. The consumers we've talked about, without them, there's no shame. And there's a whole lot of hardworking people in this industry that retailers sacrificed. They spent, it would be millions of hours just encouraging consumers to make the call, write the letter, sign the petition, go to Washington, town hall meeting locally. You go and you stand up and you speak up for supplements and our health freedom rights. What it boiled down to is commitment, a level of commitment that knew no bounds. That's what got us over the top.
For 4 years, our industry, not just the herbal industry, but also the entire dietary supplement industry, worked together. And by the end of my term as AHPA president in 1994, DSHEA passed. It was a long night and a lot of deal pulling, and Senator Hatch came through and pulled in favors, and it passed. And at that moment, we had a legitimate base on which to continue our future.
I was in the market at the time when the news came out that it had passed, and the employees, the customers, we were all so joyful. People were hugging. Some people had tears. Some people were laughing and jumping up and down. I'll never forget it because it really was the key to fostering a healthy life. And without this, we were at the behest of the pharmaceutical industry. We won.
I think that FDA has not fully, maybe even after 30 years, has not fully embraced all the parts of DSHEA, but I think it works well. I think the industry has grown. There are amazing products out there, which is a testament to DSHEA. My primary concern is not in creating more regulation or more things for legitimate industry to do. What I'd like FDA to step up and deal with companies or individuals that are selling products that are clearly not dietary supplements, that are clearly illegal, that contain illegal chemicals or that are just totally illegal. And I think they should be dealt with accordingly, and that FDA should take strong measures against such products.
We don't need to rewrite DSHEA. We need real enforcement. It's not unusual when talking to people about the risk of potential FDA action that the response is, what's the worst thing that's going to happen to me? I'll get a letter. And then maybe there'll be follow-up and maybe there won't. That's not a flaw in the statute. It's a flaw at FDA. And that's what needs to be addressed.
As we look forward, it's a pretty sunny forecast for the industry. There is a continuing consumer need for what we have, and that is a very durable need. We have to know who we really are. We are a heart-driven industry that is supported by science. As we see change in ownership, this is something that really concerns me. If venture capital or owners who come from outside the industry and have an interest in financial return as their primary goal, will there be a commitment from those kinds of owners and companies to do what we talked about happened during DSHEA? Will they show the level of commitment needed? And it will be needed. DSHEA was the third in a series of legislative campaigns that this industry ran over a 40-year period. We're 3-0. Will we go 4-0 is the big question. We also need to teach the next generation of leaders in this industry. There are very few since DSHEA that have had much political experience, don't have a lot of scars on their backs, and they need to have that experience and training somewhere, somehow. Granted, Congress is a very different place. It's much more difficult now to get anything done.
The challenge, again, also that the industry has is we don't have a Senator Hatch anymore. Rest in peace. Senator Harkins retired. Governor Richardson, who would have been here when I was with him in August of 2023, my last meeting with him before he passed away, we talked about him participating in the 30th anniversary of the passing of DSHEA. And we don't have those kinds of congressional champions. And that's going to be another challenge for the industry, is to really recruit and empower supplement champions like we've had in the past.
But we need the young generation to not be cynical about politics. I understand the reasons why, but it's to be enthusiastic about health freedom itself. It's easy to take for granted what seems to be easily at hand. Health freedom is not free. It's one of the most expensive kinds of freedom there is, because it requires constant vigilance, protection, maintenance. Without that, what we treasure as DSHEA could easily be slowly changed and modified to a point that we may not recognize it one day.